He was deployed, and I was just stopping by, but when she opened the door, I realized tonight wouldn't be ordinary. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind of calm that makes the small sounds in a home feel amplified. I sat alone in my apartment, the soft glow of the lamp on my desk casting long, gentle shadows across the walls. Outside, the city hummed faintly, distant car horns and muffled footsteps blending into the night. I was thinking of my friend, recently deployed overseas, and the odd emptiness that followed in the wake of his absence. The apartment felt quieter than usual, too still, and I realized I hadn't really noticed how much his presence had colored my days until now. A text buzzed on my phone, breaking the silence. It was from his mother. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, just the occasional message to check in, but tonight, her words carried an unexpected weight. "I could use some company tonight, if you're free." There was no urgency, no pressure, just a quiet invitation that seemed to tremble with vulnerability. I paused for a moment, rereading it. Something in the phrasing, the hesitancy beneath her simple sentence, made my chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. I hesitated. The polite, rational part of my mind told me this was just an innocent request for company, perhaps a shared meal or conversation to pass the evening. But beneath that, I felt a subtle pull, an emotional undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Her voice, when I remembered it from previous calls, carried a warmth and a fragile steadiness at the same time, like she had mastered the art of hiding her worry but never completely. I found myself imagining her sitting in the quiet of her home, the glow of the lamps reflecting softly against the walls, the faint scent of home-cooked meals lingering in the air. I imagined the living room, comfortable, familiar, yet tinged with a quiet loneliness. Perhaps there was a chair by the window where she often sat in the evenings, gazing out at the world she couldn't control. The thought of her there, alone, created a strange ache in my chest. By the time I got ready to leave, my mind was already filled with anticipation, though I would never have called it excitement. It was curiosity, empathy, and a subtle, inexplicable pull towards something that felt fragile and unspoken. The streets outside were cool as I walked, the faint breeze carrying the scent of rain and city air. Every step seemed to heighten the awareness of what tonight might hold, not in a dramatic sense, but in a delicate, human way. I reminded myself that this was just a visit, nothing more. Yet as I approached her door, my hand hovered over the handle, a small hesitation born of the unknown. Inside, I imagined her noticing the soft knock, the way she might adjust her posture or smooth the fabric of her sweater before greeting me. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, the most ordinary evenings could carry the most extraordinary weight. The quiet of the night, the glow of a single lamp, and a simple request for company had already begun to change the rhythm of my heart. Tonight, I thought, might be one of those nights where everything shifts, not with a bang, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible warmth that lingers long after the door closes behind me. The walk from the street to her door felt longer than it should have, though it was just a few steps. Perhaps it was the anticipation, the quiet tension that had begun to thread through my chest ever since I'd read her message. My hand hesitated over the doorknob, a small, almost involuntary pause. There was a faint warmth in the air that seemed to radiate from behind the door, like the house itself was aware of the fragile human presence within. When she opened it, her smile was warm, but it didn't entirely reach her eyes. There was a subtle flicker of vulnerability there, an unspoken acknowledgement that tonight was different. I offered a tentative greeting, careful not to overstep, and she stepped aside, her hand briefly brushing mine as she gestured me in. That touch was so slight, so casual, yet it lingered in a way that surprised me. A spark of warmth ran up my arm, not uncomfortable, but curious, human, and unexpected. The living room was exactly as I had imagined it from memory, soft lighting, comfortable furniture, small personal touches that reflected her taste and personality. The faint scent of a floral candle mingled with the lingering aroma of whatever she had cooked earlier. It was subtle but intimate, grounding the space in a quiet familiarity. I realized I was already noticing details I had never paid attention to before, the way the light caught the curve of the lamp, the gentle tilt of a picture frame, the small rhythm of her movements as she straightened a cushion. We settled into the room, her on the sofa, me on the edge of the armchair, though the distance between us felt smaller than it should have. Conversation began lightly, almost casually, updates about life, stories of mundane routines, but beneath the words was a soft undercurrent of curiosity and attentiveness. I noticed the way she shifted when speaking, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I realized how aware I had become of her presence. Every gesture, every slight laugh, every small pause seemed amplified in the quiet of the room. She offered me tea, and as I took the cup, our fingers brushed again. The warmth of the mug transferred to my hands, but so did something else, a fleeting awareness of the physical space we shared. There was nothing overt, no intention beyond politeness and comfort, yet the subtle tension hummed quietly between us, like an undercurrent of something waiting to be acknowledged. Her eyes met mine briefly, and in that small exchange, a multitude of unspoken emotions seemed to pass. Loneliness, gratitude, something tender and hesitant. I realized that what had begun as a simple gesture, visiting her home to keep her company, was becoming something more complex. The ordinary act of crossing a threshold had transformed into a delicate dance of presence and attention, where every look, every small movement, carried more weight than it should. As we continued to talk, the world outside faded. There was only the quiet rhythm of the room, the subtle warmth of shared space, and the gentle, unspoken acknowledgement that tonight, we were both navigating something unfamiliar yet quietly compelling. And in that moment, I understood that crossing her threshold wasn't just a matter of stepping into a home, it was stepping into the fragile intimacy of a moment that neither of us fully knew how to name, yet both were unwilling to let go of. The conversation started lightly, the kind of small talk that fills quiet rooms without demanding too much. She asked about work, about mutual friends, about things she assumed I already knew. But beneath the surface of ordinary questions, there was a rhythm that felt intimate, a gentle probing of hearts rather than facts. I realized I was leaning in slightly, more attentive than usual, listening not just to her words but to the spaces between them, the pauses where meaning lingered unsaid. It wasn't long before the discussion shifted to him, her son, my friend who had been deployed. Her voice softened when she spoke his name, a tender undercurrent of worry threading through the steady cadence. She spoke of the empty chair at the kitchen table, the unanswered phone calls, the quiet evenings filled with his absence. I responded as best I could, recalling small stories, small memories, trying to fill the silence with warmth and empathy. But I noticed something surprising. It wasn't just her loneliness I felt, it was a subtle pull toward her, a quiet desire to offer more than words. She rested her hands on her lap, fingers loosely intertwined, and I became acutely aware of the tiny gestures that revealed her unease. When she laughed softly at a memory I recounted, the sound was light, almost fragile, and for a moment I could feel it vibrating in the air between us. She tilted her head slightly, eyes searching mine as if seeking reassurance, and my chest tightened in response, not from longing, but from the urge to protect, to comfort, to stay present. The room seemed to shrink around us. The soft hum of a distant appliance, the quiet rhythm of the street outside, even the faint scent of the tea we sipped, all became more vivid in the shared intimacy. Her voice, a little hesitant at times, a little trembling at others, carried layers of emotion I couldn't ignore. I noticed how she adjusted her posture subtly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, the fabric of her sweater shifting against her skin, details that normally wouldn't matter, but tonight they anchored my attention. There were moments when neither of us spoke, yet the silence itself felt loaded with meaning. I realized how much I wanted to stay in that space, how much I wanted to simply exist in the same room as her, sharing presence without needing words. Every glance, every slight nod, every small acknowledgement built a quiet bridge between us, forming an emotional intimacy that felt as delicate as it was profound. When she paused to look down, tracing a line on the armrest with her fingers, I felt a gentle tug in my chest, a mix of admiration, care, and something I didn't yet have words for. I reached out almost instinctively, placing a hand near hers on the armrest, careful not to overstep, just close enough for warmth to pass subtly through that small space. She looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, then gave a small, grateful smile. That smile lingered in my mind long after, like the quiet echo of a melody you never want to end. By the time our conversation shifted back to lighter topics, the intimacy between us had settled like a soft warmth, unspoken but palpable. I realized that what had begun as a simple visit, an effort to keep her company, had grown into a space of trust, understanding, and subtle connection. And somewhere beneath the surface, I could feel the faint, persistent pull of something more, something neither of us yet dared to name. At some point, the conversation tapered off, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the room had grown heavy with a different kind of presence, one that didn't require words. We sat there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other, yet careful to respect the delicate distance that had always defined us. The soft hum of the heater, the muted ticking of the wall clock, even the faint creak of the floor beneath our feet became more pronounced, filling the space between us with an almost tangible awareness. She glanced out the window at the quiet street, her fingers tracing the edge of the windowsill. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the way her eyes lingered on the shadows outside, and it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. There was a vulnerability in her stillness, a quiet loneliness that she hadn't yet voiced, and I felt a pull toward it, an instinctive desire to be present, to bridge that small gap between us without forcing it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I realized I was acutely aware of the rhythm of her breathing, soft and steady, and the occasional shift of her body as she adjusted her posture. Her gaze flicked toward me once, then away, and I caught the faintest quiver of emotion in her eyes, something unspoken but deeply felt. I wanted to reach out, to offer a gesture of reassurance, but I hesitated, sensing that the weight of this silence was delicate, fragile, and not to be disturbed carelessly. I shifted slightly in my chair, noticing the warmth from the mug still cradled in my hands, and how the steam curling from it seemed to dance lazily in the lamplight. The quiet intimacy of the room wrapped around us, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the pull of attraction, not in a rush of desire, but in a slow, steady acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing between us all evening. It wasn't about what might happen, but about the subtle thrill of being seen, of being close enough to share a space so quietly sacred. Her eyes met mine again, lingering longer this time, and I caught the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was a smile that held gratitude, hesitation, and something more, an invitation without words, a fragile acknowledgement of the unspoken tension that had settled between us. My own lips curved instinctively, though I kept my posture neutral, letting the moment breathe, letting the silence speak for both of us. The room felt suspended in that quiet tension, each small movement magnified, the brushing of her hair back from her face, the subtle shifting of her sweater, the way her hand rested momentarily on the arm of the chair. Every detail became a note in an unspoken symphony, a language of presence and awareness that neither of us needed to articulate. And in that stillness, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the spaces between words carry more meaning than the words themselves. Tonight, we were both aware of it, the pull, the vulnerability, the unacknowledged desire. Yet there was no rush, no need to name it. Just the quiet warmth of shared company, the gentle weight of emotions unspoken, and the delicate awareness that this evening had begun to change the way we felt about each other, quietly, irrevocably. The quiet between us stretched long enough that it almost felt natural to lean in slightly, to let the silence become a shared presence rather than something to fill with words. She shifted in her seat, a small sigh escaping her lips, and I realized how tense she had been, how the anxiety and worry that had accompanied her son's deployment had settled into her body like a weight. Without thinking, I moved a fraction closer, careful to respect the fragile boundary, but close enough to offer a sense of reassurance. She glanced at me, her eyes soft and unguarded for the first time tonight. There was no need for words. The way her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly as our proximity increased spoke volumes. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, subtle but undeniable, and it drew me into the quiet gravity of the moment. My hand rested lightly on the arm of the chair, just near hers, not touching yet, but close enough that the small space between us felt charged. Her voice came softly, almost a whisper, as she admitted the loneliness she felt in these long evenings. I listened intently, letting the words wash over me. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the slight quiver in her jaw as she spoke, the way her eyes flicked to mine briefly, searching for understanding. Without planning it, I reached out, letting my hand hover near hers, and when our fingers brushed just slightly, it felt natural, comforting, and grounding all at once. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned a fraction closer, letting the warmth of my presence ease the tension in her body. It was subtle, nothing dramatic, but the impact was profound. The simple closeness, the brush of a hand against her own, created a bridge of comfort that went far deeper than words ever could. I could feel her exhale softly, her shoulders sagging just a little as if the weight she had been carrying had been acknowledged, shared, even momentarily lifted. The room seemed to shrink around us, the lamplight casting soft golden pools on the walls, flickering gently across her face. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of tea and candles, grounding me in the intimacy of the moment. Even the soft creak of the chair as she shifted, the gentle tapping of her fingers against her lap, became part of a rhythm we were creating together, a silent language of presence, comfort, and trust. For the first time tonight, I realized that attraction wasn't always about bold gestures or words. Sometimes, it was in the shared stillness, the subtle physical reassurance, the simple act of being close enough to notice the rhythm of someone's breath, the warmth of their body, the quiet vulnerability of their gestures. I felt the quiet pull of desire, not urgent or overwhelming, but patient, tender, and respectful. She looked at me then, eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and something softer, a gentle acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. I offered a small, reassuring smile, letting the warmth linger in my expression. She returned it, a slight tilt of her head, and for a moment, everything else, time, worry, distance, disappeared. It was just us, suspended in quiet comfort, connected in ways that words could never fully capture. In that subtle, unspoken exchange, I realized tonight had shifted something. What began as a simple visit had grown into a delicate intimacy, a bridge of trust, warmth, and gentle affection that neither of us had expected, but both quietly welcomed. The evening had deepened into a quiet, reflective calm. The soft lamplight painted gentle shadows across the room, and the aroma of tea still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of her perfume. We had fallen into an easy rhythm, talking, pausing, laughing softly, but beneath it all, there was a tension neither of us had yet named. It wasn't urgent or overwhelming, but it hummed quietly, a steady awareness of connection that neither words nor actions could fully contain. She leaned back slightly, eyes distant, and for the first time I noticed the subtle lines of concern etched across her face, not the ones that came from age, but the ones carved by worry, longing, and moments of solitude. I felt a pull in my chest, a quiet ache that wasn't quite longing, but something more, a desire to be close, to offer comfort, to be seen by her in a way that mattered. And in that moment, I realized I had been feeling it all along, though tonight had brought it to the surface. Her glance met mine, and it was fleeting, almost shy, yet loaded with meaning. It was the kind of look that doesn't need words, where a single exchange carries the weight of unspoken truths. She smiled softly, and in that small curve of her lips, I recognized something profound. She, too, had been aware of the growing bond, the subtle pull, the quiet warmth of our shared presence. It was an acknowledgement, gentle and restrained, that tonight was not ordinary, not just because her son was away, but because we had crossed an invisible threshold into something delicate, fragile, and deeply human. I noticed how she shifted slightly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, her fingers lingering near her cheek as if to steady herself. I felt a surge of admiration, her grace, her quiet strength, and her vulnerability all coexisting in a way that drew me closer emotionally, if not physically. There was no rush, no need to force the moment. The intensity of attraction was in the small, subtle details, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the tilt of her head as she listened, the barely perceptible brush of her hand against the armrest. I realized, too, that the emotional intimacy we had built was as compelling as anything romantic. The comfort, the trust, the shared silences, they had become a language of their own. And within that language, I sensed the stirring of desire, quiet but undeniable. It wasn't about passion, it was about awareness, about the heart recognizing another heart and feeling the magnetic pull of something that had been growing, almost imperceptibly, from the very start. She caught me looking at her, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I smiled back, a mixture of reassurance and acknowledgement. In that exchange, I felt a silent confession pass between us, not spoken aloud, but understood fully. We were aware of the connection, and we both welcomed it, cautiously, respectfully, and with a tenderness that made the room feel smaller, warmer, and infinitely more intimate. Tonight had begun as a simple visit, but it had transformed into something profound. In the quiet acknowledgement of mutual attraction, in the subtle recognition of emotional closeness, I understood that we were stepping towards something neither of us had expected. A slow, steady bond had formed, and with it, the knowledge that our connection was as real as it was delicate, and entirely worth nurturing. The night had deepened into a calm, gentle stillness, and the city outside had quieted into distant, muted sounds. Inside, the room held a comforting warmth, the kind that settles into your bones and makes the world feel momentarily suspended. We had spent hours talking, pausing, laughing softly, and simply being near one another. The earlier tension had softened, replaced by a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement that tonight had changed something, subtly but irrevocably. She sat back in her chair, a small smile brushing her lips, and I noticed how relaxed her posture had become. The weight of worry and loneliness, so palpable when I first arrived, had eased under the quiet reassurance of our presence. I felt a gentle pride, not in any boastful sense, but in the knowledge that just being there, offering my attention and care, had mattered to her. There was an intimacy in this simple act, a connection that words could never fully capture. We shared a final silence, comfortable and unhurried. Our hands brushed once more as I reached for my empty cup, a fleeting contact that spoke more than anything either of us could have said. It was warm, grounding, and familiar, a gentle reminder of the trust that had blossomed between us tonight. I noticed the way her eyes softened as she watched me, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed. It wasn't just attraction, it was care, respect, and the quiet fulfillment of human connection. As I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. There was a pause, a moment that stretched longer than necessary, and I felt the gentle hum of anticipation beneath it. Our eyes met, lingering just enough to convey the emotions that words could not. Gratitude, warmth, and something quietly affectionate glimmered there, subtle but unmistakable. I gave her a small, respectful smile, and she returned it, a soft curve of understanding that sealed the night with unspoken agreement. This bond mattered, and it would endure. The hug at the door was brief, careful, yet infused with warmth. Her arms rested lightly on my shoulders, hers cheek brushing briefly against my chest, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The comfort we shared, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that can be felt in proximity and presence, was enough. When we pulled away, her smile lingered in my mind, and I knew it would stay with me long after the door closed behind me. Walking back into the night, I felt a quiet shift within myself. The evening had begun as a simple act of companionship, yet it had transformed into something deeply meaningful. There was awareness now, a mutual recognition of subtle desire, emotional intimacy, and trust. It was a slow, steady flame that had been kindled gently, yet its warmth was undeniable. Tonight had been a revelation, that affection could be tender, patient, and profound without rushing, that emotional connection could carry a weight more satisfying than any dramatic gesture, that love, or the beginnings of it, could be found in quiet presence, shared silences, and simple acts of care. I knew one thing with certainty: we had crossed a threshold tonight, and the bond we had begun to nurture would linger, quietly growing stronger with each shared moment, each gentle touch, and each word spoken, or left unspoken. The night ended, but the warmth remained.